It's the Real News Network. I'm Sharmini Perez coming to you from Baltimore. Airstrikes killed at least 27 people at Al-Quds Hospital in Aleppo, Syria on Wednesday. The hospital was supported by the Doctors Without Borders and the International Committee for the Red Cross. There were children and the last remaining pediatrician in the city. They are among the dead. These recent escalations of bombings has undermined the peace talks in Geneva. Aleppo has become the center of military escalation. 6 days of airstrikes and rebel shelling split between government forces and rebels have killed 200 people, 2/3 of them on the opposition side, says the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights. The UN envoy, Staffan de Mistura, appealed to the presidents of the United States and Russia to intervene. With me to discuss the situation is Patrick Cockburn and Joseph Daher. Patrick is the Middle East correspondent for The Independent, and Joseph Daher teaches at the University of Lausanne in Geneva, Switzerland. Thank you both for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Patrick, give us a sense of what's going on, who's responsible for the bombing of the hospital, and what's evolving on the ground in terms of putting these peace talks at risk.
Well, I don't think the peace talks are something that's likely to stop either side dropping bombs or shelling. I mean, the government is doing what it's been doing really from the beginning in 2011, which is dropping bombs on civilian areas to force out the civilian population, so the rebels are left in areas that are only inhabited by themselves. They're doing that in Aleppo, but they did that in I've seen whole areas or ghost areas of just smashed up buildings. North Damascus, same thing. Most of this is a bombing in Aleppo and is very indiscriminate. The opposition are using artillery, mortars. They don't have the same firepower as the government, but the whole of the western side of Aleppo, which is under government control, is being hit, according to reports from the area.
And Joseph, let me ask you, what do you know of what's going on the ground at this time, and what the reaction of the people are living in Aleppo?
First of all, Aleppo has been suffering for more than 3 years of barrel bombs from the regime planes. It has been nearly ongoing. And it's not only about Free Syrian Army people in the liberated areas of Aleppo. You have at least 300,000 people still living over there and organizing by themselves, despite the continuous threats from the regime, the bombing of the regime, the barrel bombs, etc. They've been continuing living in these areas, providing services to the population. You had municipalities organizing by themselves, welcoming refugees from other areas if they didn't left now for other areas as well because of the bombings. So it's not area that are completely only constituted of Free Syrian Army people. Plus, it's areas that oppose Islamic fundamentalist forces such as Daesh and Jabhat al-Nusra. They kicked out from these areas this kind of organization. So what the regime is also doing is targeting areas that represent democratic alternative in Syria. And this, the regime has been ongoing in this strategy since the beginning of 2011. So the reaction on the ground is it's completely to denounce these bombings and to organize the popular resistance on the ground to resist the way they can to these barrel bombs and attacks, indiscriminate attacks.
And Patrick, what do you think of what Joseph is saying? Is the government, and I guess the allied Russian forces, are they targeting democratic forces in this area?
I think they're just targeting these areas. You know, this is very indiscriminate. You know, it's bombs being dropped pretty well anywhere and everywhere. I don't know how far they're aimed at any particular facility, you know. But I doubt it personally. I mean, when you look at areas, areas I've been in that have been devastated, the objective seems to be to destroy everything, you know, in suburbs of Damascus and in Homs and elsewhere. So I don't think that they're targeting any particular group. It's just it's generally to drive out the civilian population.
Why do you say that the government forces and the Russian allies are targeting the democratic opposition forces in the country? What evidence do we have of that?
Well, we have lots of evidence of this issue. For the regime, bombing has been going on since nearly the first years of the revolution, targeting popular forces, and after with the awakening of the Free Syrian Army, targeting Free Syrian Army forces. And for example, Raqqa, that was occupied since 2013 October by Daesh, was not was not targeted like other areas of Syria where you had democratic popular forces, because the regime since the beginning only want one alternative, that is Daesh, to present itself as the protector and the moderate of Syria to the Western countries. And we've seen this similar thing occurring with the Russian intervention, a military intervention that started a while ago. But I mean, if we speak, practically speaking, in October 2015, most of the targets of the Russian bombing, 80%, according to, for example, the Violation Democratic Center, which is within Syria, and other also analysts, in the first few months of the Russian bombing, most of the targets were not Daesh, or Jabhat al-Nusra, but Free Syrian Army forces, civilians, bombing hospitals, bombing civilian infrastructure that is much needed in the liberated areas. But this is a clear strategy to annihilate any kind of popular alternative democratic resistance within Syria. This is very clear from both the Syrian dictatorship, Russia, Iran, and the other allies of the Assad regime, such as Hezbollah.
And Patrick, what do you make of what he's saying? You're saying this is indiscriminate bombing, but you know, obviously forces know where hospitals are.
Well, I don't know that they do really. I mean, I think indiscriminate bombing is indiscriminate, but I think. You know, the opposition has always held that the Damascus government and the Russians have never attacked Islamic State, but I don't see how you can maintain that. They attacked and recaptured Palmyra. They attacked west of Aleppo to the big air base at Quercus there. So they certainly are fighting Islamic State. They're also fighting pretty well all the rest of the armed opposition, whether it's al-Nusra, whether it's other sections of it, whether it's the Free Syrian Army, that I think they're attacking them all. You know, is it in their political interests for the opposition to be portrayed as being purely jihadi Salafi organizations, extreme Sunni organizations, like Islamic State or al-Nusra? Yes, it is, obviously, in their political interests that they should be so. But it's also true on the ground that the armed opposition is dominated by that most of it is Islamic State or al-Nusra, with some other organizations as well who are outside these two groups.
So what we know thus far is the humanitarian crisis is escalating. Let's look at what Chairman of the United Nations Humanitarian Task Force, Jan Egeland, had to say.
As a humanitarian worker and as chair of this task force of the ISSG on humanitarian access, I could not in any way express how high the stakes are for the next hours and days. The stakes are so incredibly high because so many civilian lives are at stake, so many humanitarian health workers and relief workers are being bombed, killed, maimed at the moment, that the whole lifeline to millions of people is now also at stake.
So, gentlemen, in addition to the escalating humanitarian condition on the ground, the peace talks are also falling apart. The UN envoy, Staffan de Mistura, has appealed to President of the United States and Russia to intervene. First, let me go to you, Patrick. What kind of intervention is he looking for here?
Well, I mean, the leverage of the US and Russia is over their allies. The Russians over the Assad government, and hence over the Syrian army, in order to stop this escalation in bombing. The US influence over opposition formations and over countries that support them, like Turkey or Saudi Arabia and so forth. So I think he's looking in that direction. But it's not at all clear that these outside powers quite have the influence to force the de-escalation of the fighting at this stage.
And Joseph, describe to us why the peace talks have now fallen apart in Geneva and what could bring them back to the table.
First of all, it's the continuation of the war of the Assad regime against the Syrian people that stopped the peace talk to continue. We must be clear. The opposition withdrew from the peace talks because the situation on the ground was worsening. And you can see it, 200 people dead in the past 6 days in Aleppo. This is only in Aleppo. If you speak about other areas of Syria, the truce in many aspects has been completely broken, and most of the time by regime forces. Just as the declaration, the official statement from the Russian state that it was withdrawing from Syria was completely untrue. It was a diplomatic move to satisfy the framework of the peace talk in Geneva. And we've seen that the Russian soldiers are still on the ground, more than 5,000. We've seen that Russian bombing is continuously continuing. So any kind, we're not witnessing at all any kind of pressure from Russia towards the Assad regime dictatorship to push into the negotiation. On the opposite, and this has been going on since the beginning between Russia and Assad regime, it's to continue the war until the opposition is completely dead.
And Patrick, what do you make of what Joseph is saying? Because there was a withdrawal and many announcements made about that withdrawal of Russia. Why are they assisting in the airstrikes now?
Well, it was always a partial withdrawal. And since their main force there is obviously the Russian Air Force, planes can, even if they have withdrawn, they can come back from Russia very fast. So that was always incomplete. I don't. Do the Russians? The question is, do the Russians want to give a blank check to Assad to try to win the war? I doubt it very much. How far can they influence his actions? I would have thought quite a lot. So as the UN was saying, this is a crucial moment when we see if this ceasefire can be revived. What was behind the ceasefire, what made it different from what had happened previously in Syria, is that it was backed by the superpowers. We count Russia as a superpower in the region at the moment. Are they capable of maintaining this ceasefire in real terms, or not? And that's why it is such a crucial moment.
All right, Patrick Cockburn, Joseph Daher, thank you both for joining us today, and hope to have you both back. I think this issue is not going to go away anytime soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us on the Real News Network.